Hey, my name is Eliot. I'm 31. Until 4 months ago, I was just the guy designing websites in a basement apartment, invisible to everyone who mattered. Then one rainy night, my wealthy married neighbor knocked on my door with leftover cake and lonely eyes. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. But when she finally left, she lingered in my doorway and whispered, "Do you have space in your bed?" The scent of her perfume mixed with rain and expensive wine, and I heard myself say, "I was saving it just for you." If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I was never supposed to notice Julia Harkness. She lived in the big house with the perfectly manicured lawn, and I rented the basement suite next door for $800 a month. Different worlds, you know? But that rainy Thursday night in October changed everything. I'd been working late on a website redesign, hunched over my laptop in that cramped basement apartment, when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Not unusual. People cut through our shared driveway all the time. But then came the knock. Soft, hesitant, like whoever it was might change their mind. I opened the door, and there she was, Julia, holding a black umbrella that dripped steadily onto my doormat, her dark hair slightly damp, wearing this cream-colored sweater that made her look, I don't know, elegant, I guess, even standing there awkwardly on my concrete steps. "Hi," she said, and her voice was quieter than I expected. "I'm Julia, from next door." I knew who she was, of course. I'd seen her loading groceries from her BMW, watering plants in designer jeans, hosting dinner parties where people laughed too loud on the back patio. But we'd never actually spoken. Different worlds, remember? "Elliot," I said, stepping back. "Everything okay?" She held up a small white box. "I have. Well, we had people over tonight. Brian's colleagues. There's leftover cake, and I thought—" She trailed off, glancing past me into my apartment. "You work late a lot. Thought you might be hungry." The truth was, I'd been living on instant ramen and whatever was on sale at the corner store. The freelance web design business wasn't exactly booming, and most of my clients paid late. But I wasn't about to tell her that. "That's really nice of you," I said. "Would you like to come in? Just for a minute. You're getting soaked out there." She hesitated, looking back toward her house. Most of the lights were off except for one upstairs window. "Brian's working late again," she said, almost to herself. Then louder, "Just for a minute." My place was embarrassing compared to hers. Second-hand furniture, dishes in the sink, cables everywhere. But she didn't seem to notice. She set the cake box on my small table and looked around with genuine curiosity. "It's cozy," she said, and somehow didn't sound like she was lying. We stood there for a moment, not quite knowing what to say. She was beautiful, but not in that polished way you see in magazines. More like real beautiful. Tired around the eyes, laugh lines that suggested she used to smile more than she did now. 46, maybe 47. Old enough to make me feel young at 31, but not old enough to make me feel like a kid. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, fingering the edge of my laptop, where code still glowed on the screen. "2 years. It's quiet. Good for work." "What kind of work?" "Web design, mostly small businesses. Nothing exciting." She nodded like that was exactly the right kind of nothing exciting. "Brian's in finance. He travels a lot, or works late, or both." There was something in her voice I couldn't place. Not quite sadness, but emptiness, maybe. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, about the neighborhood, about the weather, about nothing important. But there was this undercurrent I couldn't ignore. The way she kept glancing at my unmade bed in the corner. The way her fingers played with her wedding ring. The way she seemed in no hurry to leave, even though she'd said, just for a minute. When she finally did go, she lingered in the doorway. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me in. It gets quiet over there sometimes." I watched her walk back through the hedge that separated our properties, her umbrella forgotten in my apartment. She moved carefully, like she was trying not to make noise. The big house swallowed her up, and I was alone again with the sound of rain on my small windows. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak from the house above made me wonder if it was her footsteps. Every car that passed made me think of her husband coming home late from work. I ate the cake she'd brought, some fancy chocolate thing that probably cost more than I spent on food in a week, and thought about the way she'd looked around my apartment like she wanted to remember it. Morning came too quickly. I was making coffee when I glimpsed her through the kitchen window, moving around in her bright, airy space upstairs. She was wearing a robe, hair pulled back, completely unaware I could see her. For just a second, our eyes met through the glass. She froze. I froze. Then she quickly moved away from the window, and I felt like I'd been caught doing something wrong. My phone buzzed an hour later. Unknown number. "Thank you for last night. The kindness meant more than you know. Julia." I stared at that text for probably 10 minutes, trying to figure out how she'd gotten my number. Then I remembered. She'd asked if I ever did work for individuals, and I'd given her my business card. Professional networking, right? Nothing more. I was still staring at the message when a black sedan pulled into the driveway next door. Brian. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He gathered his briefcase and overnight bag, then looked directly at my window. Even from a distance, I could see his expression wasn't friendly. He collected the mail from their box, still watching my apartment, then disappeared into the house. That evening, I heard them through the thin walls. Not words exactly, but the rhythm of an argument. His voice, deep and sharp. Hers, quieter but persistent. It went on for maybe an hour, then silence. I tried to focus on work, but I kept listening for sounds from next door, the dishwasher running, footsteps on hardwood, the faint sound of a television turning on, then off again. I woke up the next morning to find something draped over my porch railing. Julia's scarf, the one she'd been wearing under her sweater that first night. It was silk, cream-colored, and it smelled faintly of her perfume. Something floral but not too sweet. Sophisticated. I knocked on her back door around noon, holding the scarf carefully. She answered immediately like she'd been waiting. "You forgot this," I said. "Oh." She looked genuinely surprised, but her fingers lingered when she took it from me, just for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you. I didn't even notice." We were standing close in her doorway, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell her shampoo. Something passed between us in that moment. Not quite a spark, but recognition, maybe. Like we both understood something we couldn't name. "Julia." A voice from inside the house. Not Brian. Too young. "Coming, Lila," she called back, but didn't move away from me immediately. "Your daughter?" I asked. "Home from college for the weekend. She's—" Julia glanced back toward the house. She's very observant. I heard footsteps approaching, and Julia stepped back. A young woman appeared behind her, early 20s, dark hair like her mother's, but sharper eyes. She looked at me with unconcealed curiosity. "This is Eliot," Julia said quickly. "From next door. He was just returning my scarf." "Nice to meet you," Lila said, but her tone suggested she was already forming opinions about me. "Mum, Ruth's at the front door. Something about the garden committee." Julia's expression tightened. "I should go. Thank you again, Eliot." As I walked back to my apartment, I saw Ruth Drayton watching from her garden on the other side. 70-something widow, the kind of neighbor who noticed everything and forgot nothing. She gave me a long look that felt like a warning. That night, my phone buzzed at 12:47 a.m. Awake. Just that one word, but my heart started racing. I looked out my window and saw a faint light moving in Julia's kitchen. Not the overhead lights, something smaller. A phone screen, maybe. Yes, I typed back, can't sleep. Neither can I. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Like she was writing and deleting, writing and deleting. Finally, I keep thinking about last night. How nice it was to talk to someone who actually listened. I stared at that message, knowing I should probably say something safe, something neighborly. Instead, I wrote, "You can talk to me anytime." That might be dangerous. Before I could respond, I heard my back door. Not a knock, just the soft sound of it opening. I'd left it unlocked, which I never did, but somehow I'd known. She was standing on my steps wearing a long coat over what looked like pajamas, holding a steaming mug. Her hair was down and she looked younger in the darkness, vulnerable. "I made tea," she said simply. "Too much for one person." We sat on my back steps, sharing the mug between us. The tea was some expensive blend that tasted like flowers and honey. Nothing like the grocery store bags I was used to. "Brian doesn't like tea," she said after a long silence. "Says it's pretentious." "What does he like?" She thought about that. "Golf, work, scotch, things that don't require conversation." We sat there for maybe an hour, talking in whispers about everything and nothing. Her daughter's art history major, my failed attempt at a startup, the way the neighborhood changed when the original families moved out and developers moved in. Normal conversation, except for the way she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Except for the way my pulse quickened every time she laughed. "I should go back," she said finally, but made no move to leave. "Probably," I agreed, but didn't get up either. She turned to face me then, and in the moonlight, I could see something in her expression I recognized. Loneliness, the kind that sits in your chest like a weight. "Eliot," she said, and my name sounded different in her voice, softer. "Do you have space in your bed?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Not sexual exactly, though there was something there, crackling under the surface. More like she was asking if there was room in my life for whatever this was becoming. "I was saving it just for you," I heard myself say. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to be so direct, like maybe she'd expected me to pretend I didn't understand what she was really asking. "Everything's about to change, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I think it is." She stood up then, handed me the empty mug, and slipped back through the hedge without another word. But I sat on those steps for another hour, replaying every moment, every word, every look, knowing that whatever had just started between us was going to be complicated, dangerous even, but worth it. God help me. It was going to be worth it. I finally went inside around 3 a.m. and found something on my small table that hadn't been there before. An envelope with my name written in careful script. Inside was a single key on a silk ribbon. No note, no explanation. Just a key. I held it up to the light, this small piece of metal that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I knew what it meant, what it offered, what it would cost us both if we used it. I put it in my desk drawer and tried to sleep, but every sound from the house next door made me think of Julia lying awake in her marriage bed, maybe thinking about the same things I was thinking about. Morning came eventually, the way it always does, and with it, all the reasons why this was impossible. why I should give the key back and pretend that night on the steps never happened. But when I looked out my window and saw her watering plants in her garden, wearing yesterday's perfume and a smile that seemed just for me, I knew I wasn't going to be that smart. The key stayed in my drawer, and Julia Harkness became the most beautiful complication of my life. Miles showed up that afternoon like he always did on Saturdays, carrying coffee and gossip from his job at the marketing firm downtown. He'd been my best friend since college, one of those easygoing guys who made everything seem less serious than it was. "You look like hell," he said, settling into my one decent chair. Late night, I thought about Julia on my steps, about the key hidden in my drawer, about the way she'd said my name in the darkness. Couldn't sleep. "New project keeping you up?" Something like that. He launched into a story about his latest dating disaster, some woman who'd ordered wine by pointing at the price, not the name. And I tried to listen, but every few minutes I caught myself glancing toward the window, looking for signs of life next door. "Earth to Eliot," Miles said. "You're not hearing a word I'm saying." "Sorry, just distracted." He studied my face with the expression he got when he was trying to solve a puzzle. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the fancy neighbor lady, would it? The one who was watering plants when I got here?" My stomach dropped. "What makes you say that?" "Just a hunch. Plus you've got that look." "What look?" "Like you're standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump." Before I could respond, there was a knock at my door. Firm, confident. Nothing like Julia's hesitant tap from 2 nights before. It was her daughter, Lila. Up close, she looked even more like a younger version of her mother, but with an intensity Julia kept carefully hidden. "Hi," she said, glancing past me at Miles. "Sorry to interrupt. I think I left my jacket here yesterday when Mom and I were—" She paused, clearly making something up on the spot. "When we were discussing the garden committee thing." I knew she hadn't left anything, just like I knew this wasn't really about a jacket. "Come on in," I said. "I'm Eliot, by the way. This is my friend Miles." "Lila." She shook Miles's hand with a firmness that suggested she'd been raised to make good impressions. Then her attention shifted back to me. "Nice place. Cozy." She wandered around my small apartment with the same careful attention her mother had shown. But where Julia had seemed genuinely curious, Lila felt like she was conducting reconnaissance. Her eyes lingered on my unmade bed, on the coffee mug I'd forgotten to wash, on the business cards scattered across my desk. "Web design, right? That must be interesting work. Do you have a lot of clients in the neighborhood?" "Some," I said carefully. "My mom mentioned you might be able to help her with some computer stuff. She's not great with technology." Miles was watching this exchange with growing amusement. He could sense undercurrents even when he didn't understand them. "I should probably get going," Lila said after a few more minutes of casual interrogation. "Oh, and Eliot, be careful around here. People talk, especially Ruth Drayton. She sees everything." After she left, Miles turned to me with raised eyebrows. "Okay, what the hell was that about?" "I have no idea." "Bullshit. That kid was warning you about something. What aren't you telling me?" I almost said it then. Almost told him about Julia's midnight visit, about the key, about the way she'd looked at me when she asked if I had space in my bed. But something held me back. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. Make it something I'd have to deal with instead of just dream about. "Nothing's happening, Miles. She's just a neighbor." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his face. But he knew when to push and when to let things go. "Just be careful, man. Rich married ladies in fancy neighborhoods. That's not your usual type." I don't have a usual type. Sure you do. Broke artists with commitment issues and daddy problems. Much safer than whatever this is. That evening, I heard the dishwasher humming next door. Then piano music. Something classical and melancholy. Julia played, apparently. Another thing I didn't know about her. I found myself standing at my window, watching her shadow move across the lit kitchen. She was cleaning up from dinner, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd done this same routine thousands of times. But there was something different about her movements tonight, less mechanical, like she was thinking about something else. The music stopped. The kitchen light went out, but a few minutes later, another light came on upstairs. Her bedroom, I realized. I could see her silhouette through the gauzy curtains, could tell she was getting ready for bed. I forced myself to look away. This was exactly the kind of thing Lila had been warning me about, the kind of behavior that got people talking. But an hour later, when my phone buzzed with a message from Julia, I answered immediately. Thank you for being kind to Lila today. She's protective of me. She seems like a good kid. She is. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Like her mother. I stared at that last line, trying to read a meaning into it. Was she talking about being smart enough to stay away from complications? Or smart enough to recognize them when they appeared? Are you smart enough to stay away from dangerous neighbors? I typed, then deleted it. Too direct. Instead, I wrote, smart runs in the family, apparently. Sometimes I wonder, smart people don't usually find themselves standing on other people's doorsteps at midnight. Maybe they do. Maybe they're just smart enough to know when it's worth the risk. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Whatever she was thinking, it was taking her time to figure out how to say it. Finally, what if the risk is bigger than you think? What if it is? This time, the pause was longer. Long enough for me to wonder if she'd decided not to respond at all. I should let you sleep. Good night, Eliot. Good night, Julia. But I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house next door settling for the night. Footsteps moving from room to room, water running, the creak of bed springs as someone lay down. Somewhere above me, Julia was lying in her marriage bed, maybe staring at the ceiling the same way I was staring at mine, maybe thinking about keys and risks and the space between what we wanted and what we could have. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. We'd catch glimpses of each other through windows, exchange careful nods when we got our mail at the same time, text each other brief, innocuous messages that somehow felt loaded with meaning. Thanks for the cake recommendation. Brian loved it. Glad to help. The bakery on 5th makes good coffee too. I'll have to try it sometime. Let me know if you need directions. Surface-level conversation that felt like code, like we were both testing the boundaries of whatever this was, seeing how close we could get without crossing any lines we couldn't uncross. Thursday evening, there was a neighborhood book club meeting at Julia's house. I could see cars arriving from my window, expensive sedans and SUVs driven by women in designer clothes, and men who looked like they belonged in boardrooms. Ruth Drayton's ancient Cadillac. A few other neighbors I recognized but didn't know. I was settling in to work when there was a knock at my door. Julia, wearing a black dress that made her look elegant and untouchable. This is probably crazy, she said without preamble, but we're one person short for book club. Would you be interested in joining us? Just for tonight. I looked down at my jeans and old t-shirt. I'm not exactly dressed for your crowd. You look fine. Besides, it's just neighbors talking about books. Nothing fancy. But everything about her was fancy. The dress, the jewelry, the way she carried herself like she belonged in rooms I'd only seen in magazines. Still, there was something in her expression. Not quite pleading, but hopeful. That made it impossible to say no. What's the book? Some mystery novel Ruth picked. Nobody actually read it. Then what do you talk about? She smiled, and for a moment looked less like the polished wife of a finance executive and more like the woman who'd sat on my steps drinking tea. Gossip, mostly. Whose marriage is falling apart, who's sleeping with their personal trainer, who's having money problems they're trying to hide. Sounds dangerous. It is. That's what makes it interesting. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Julia's living room, trying not to feel out of place among the designer furniture and original artwork. The other book club members were exactly what I'd expected. Wealthy, educated, competitive, in that subtle way rich people perfected. They welcomed me with the kind of polite interest that felt like a job interview. Ruth Drayton was there, of course, watching me with sharp eyes from her seat by the window. Brian showed up halfway through, greeting everyone with practiced charm before settling into a leather chair where he could observe the room. But it was Lila who made me most nervous. She'd come home from college again. Apparently, she was taking a semester off to figure things out, and spent the evening asking me pointed questions disguised as small talk. So, Eliot, what made you choose this neighborhood? It's pretty quiet for someone your age. The rent was right, and I like quiet. Do you date much? I mean, it must be hard meeting people when you work from home. I felt Julia stiffen beside me on the couch. Not really looking for anything serious right now. Smart man, Brian said from across the room. Marriage is complicated enough without rushing into it. There was an uncomfortable silence. Julia's hand was resting on the couch cushion between us, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin, close enough that moving my hand an inch would mean our fingers touched. I didn't move my hand, but I wanted to. The evening dragged on, discussions of property values and school districts, complaints about city council decisions and neighbor disputes. I contributed when I could, but mostly I watched Julia navigate the social dynamics with practiced ease. She laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions, played her role perfectly. But every now and then, she glanced at me with an expression that seemed to say, "This is my life. This is what I'm supposed to want." What do you think of it? When people started leaving around 9:30, Julia walked them to the door with polite goodbyes and promises to host again soon. I hung back, unsure whether I should go with the crowd or wait for a private moment. "Eliot," she said, as the last car pulled away, "could you help me with something in the kitchen?" Brian was upstairs taking calls. I could hear his voice through the ceiling. Lila was in her room with music playing. Julia led me to the kitchen where remnants of the book club spread covered granite counters. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said, starting to clear plates and glasses. "I know it wasn't exactly your scene." "It was fine. Your friends seem nice." "They're not really my friends. They're Brian's colleagues' wives mostly, people I socialize with because it's expected." I started helping her load the dishwasher, our arms occasionally brushing as we reached for the same items. Each accidental contact felt electric. "That must be lonely," I said. She paused, holding a wine glass up to the light to check for lipstick marks. "You have no idea." The kitchen fell quiet except for the sound of running water and clinking dishes. Julia seemed lost in thought, moving through the cleanup routine on autopilot. "Julia," I started, then stopped. What was I going to say? That I understood loneliness? That I'd been thinking about her every day since that first night? That the key she'd given me was burning a hole in my desk drawer? Instead, I said, "If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who actually listens, you know where to find me." She set down the glass and turned to face me. We were standing close in the bright kitchen, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to smell her perfume mixed with wine and coffee. "That's a dangerous offer," she said quietly. "Maybe I like danger. You don't know what you're saying. Try me." For a moment, I thought she might finally say whatever had been building between us since that first rainy night. But then footsteps sounded on the stairs, and she stepped back just as Brian appeared in the doorway. "Everything cleaned up?" he asked, but his eyes were on me, not the kitchen. "Almost," Julia said, her voice perfectly steady. "Eliot was just helping." "That's kind of him." Brian's tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it. Not quite suspicion, but awareness, like he was filing away information for later use. I said my goodnights and headed for the door, but Julia followed me onto the front porch. "Wait," she said, pressing something into my palm as we stood in the shadow of her perfectly manicured hedges. It was a folded piece of paper, small, cream-colored, expensive, the kind of stationery rich women kept for personal correspondence. "Don't read it until you get home," she whispered. "And Eliot, be careful. Ruth sees everything, Lila notices everything, and Brian." She glanced back toward the house, where light spilled from the living room windows. "Brian's suspicious of everything." I walked home on unsteady legs, the note burning in my pocket. Once inside my apartment, I sat at my small table and unfolded it with hands that weren't quite steady. "Back door, 12:30, if you want to." Simple words that changed everything. An invitation that was also a test, a question that demanded an answer. I looked at my clock. 11:47 p.m. 43 minutes to decide whether I was brave enough to want something I couldn't have, whether I was stupid enough to risk everything for a woman who belonged to someone else. I spent 39 of those minutes pacing my small apartment, trying to convince myself to stay inside, to be smart, to be safe. But at 12:29, I was standing at my back door, key in hand, heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. Maybe I was. The door opened and Julia slipped inside like a ghost. She changed out of the black dress into jeans and a soft sweater. But she still looked like she belonged in magazines, not my cramped apartment. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, leaning against my closed door. I wasn't sure either. We stood there in the darkness of my kitchen. Two people who'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The air between us felt charged, dangerous, full of possibilities that scared us both. "Julia," I started. "Don't," she said. "Don't say anything. Not yet. Just let me be here for a minute." So I did. I let her stand in my kitchen, let her look around my small space like she was trying to memorize it. Let myself look at her in the dim light from my laptop screen, beautiful and sad and more real than anything else in my life. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she moved to my small table where a bottle of wine sat unopened, a gift from a client I'd never bothered to drink. "May I?" she asked. I nodded, found two mismatched glasses, watched her pour wine with practiced grace. We sat across from each other at my tiny table, the space between us feeling both infinite and non-existent. "Tell me something," she said. "Something true." "About what?" "About you. About why you're here, in this basement apartment, designing websites for people you've never met." I thought about giving her the safe answer, the story about following my passion, about choosing independence over stability. But something in her expression demanded honesty. "Because I'm hiding," I said. "From expectations, from disappointment, from the possibility of wanting something too much and not getting it." She nodded like she understood perfectly. "I've been hiding too, for 15 years. From what?" "From the woman I used to be." before I became Mrs. Brian Harkness, before I learned to say the right things and wear the right clothes and pretend that dinner parties and book clubs and charity galas were enough. She took a sip of wine, and I watched the way her lips curved around the glass, the way her throat moved when she swallowed. What was she like? The woman you used to be? Messier, louder. She painted badly and cooked worse and fell in love with inappropriate men who made her laugh until her stomach hurt. Julia's smile was sad and distant. She would have liked you. What makes you think I'm inappropriate? You're sitting in a basement apartment at 12:30 in the morning drinking wine with your married neighbor. If that's not inappropriate, I don't know what is. She was right, of course. Everything about this was wrong. The age difference, the class difference, the marriage that stood between us like a wall we couldn't climb. But sitting there in my small kitchen, watching her relax for maybe the first time since I'd known her, wrong felt like the most right thing I'd ever done. Julia, I said again, and this time she didn't stop me. What are we doing? I don't know. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I haven't felt this awake in years. We talked until almost dawn, about books and travel and dreams we'd given up, about the way neighborhoods changed and people learned to live with choices they'd made when they were younger and thought they knew everything, about loneliness and the different shapes it took when you were surrounded by people who knew your name, but not your heart. When she finally stood to leave, the sky outside my small windows was starting to lighten. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "This can't happen again," she said, without turning around. "I know. I mean it, Eliot. This was a mistake." "Probably." She turned then, and I could see tears in her eyes. "So why does it feel like the first real thing I've done in 15 years? Before I could answer, she was gone, slipping out my back door like she'd never been there at all. But the wine glasses sat on my table, proof that it hadn't been a dream. And her scarf, the same cream-colored silk from that first night, lay draped over my chair, forgotten in her hurry to get home before anyone noticed she was missing. I sat there as the sun rose, holding her scarf and breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, knowing she was right, knowing this couldn't happen again, knowing it would anyway. Some doors stay cracked no matter how tightly you try to close them.